They told the world I was just a tired old lady with memory issues. That the things I said weren't real, just confused ramblings. But what they didn't know was that I had every date, every name, every lie written down. So when they tried to rewrite my life, I turned on the mic and told the truth loud enough to be heard everywhere. They started whispering about me like I wasn't even in the room. I was sitting right there, cardigan buttoned, hands folded, eyes wide open, while my daughter told the new church counselor that I was getting forgetful lately. Her voice was sweet, like syrup, but every word cut through me like glass. She gets confused about things, she said, brushing a fake tear from her cheek. It's not her fault. She's just old. I stared at the beige carpet beneath my orthopedic shoes. One thread was loose, curling like the tail of something trying to escape. I knew exactly what was happening. It didn't start overnight. No, it began slow, like water boiling. Little things. I'd mention something from the past, and they'd laugh like I was making it up. I'd tell the truth about how things really happened, about the money my husband left, about the things that were taken, about the lies that stained this family years ago, and they'd wave me off. You remember it wrong, Mom. Grandma, that never happened. But it did. All of it. I have every journal from 1962 until now, kept in a wooden trunk at the foot of my bed. Each one labeled, dated, written in blue ink, because black fades faster. Names, dates, fights, secrets. My memories, yes, but more than that, records. I wasn't confused. I was careful. But my daughter, my own flesh and blood, wanted those memories erased. Wanted to rewrite history in a way that made her the hero. Wanted to bury the truth beneath pity and polished smiles. And she knew if I told anyone what I knew, about what she did to her brother, about the will she accidentally lost, about the trust fund she cashed out, well, people might listen. Unless they believed I was losing my mind. So she planted the seed. The church started treating me like a fragile bird. The neighbors stopped asking about my garden. Even the local librarian asked if I needed help finding my books, the same shelf I've used for 20 years. It was like watching myself disappear. But I wasn't gone. I was still here. And I still remembered. One Sunday afternoon, I overheard my grandson, 18 smug, his future bought with money that was never his, say something that finally cracked me open. She's not even sure what day it is, he told his girlfriend. She told me the same story twice last week, and neither of them made sense. Honestly, she probably made half of it up. They were sitting in the sunroom, laughing. I was in the hallway, frozen. I wanted to storm in and scream. I wanted to throw the journals at their feet and make them read every page. But something inside me said wait. Watch. Listen. Gather. So I did. That night, I opened the wooden trunk and began going through the journals. One by one. I made a list, the money I gave, the times I babysat, the lies told to my face, the time my daughter signed my name on that check, all of it. Then I made a second list, who would care, and who wouldn't. I knew the church wouldn't help. They already thought I was unraveling. My son was too afraid of his sister to speak up. My grandson thought I was a joke. But there was someone who did care. Someone who'd once asked me to speak at a podcast event at the library last spring, a young woman named Hallie. She ran a local station called Truth and Time, where older voices shared real stories of forgotten lives. Back then I declined. Said I didn't have anything worth telling. Now? I had everything. I called her that Monday. My hands trembled a little when I held the phone to my ear, but my voice stayed steady. Hallie, I said. Do you still want someone to talk about what people tried to hide? She paused. Then I heard her smile. I've been waiting for your story, she said. That weekend, I packed my journals in a canvas bag. I left the house quietly, while my daughter was busy rearranging the kitchen for the third time that week, for safety, she said. Always rearranging things. Always shifting truth like furniture. I took the bus. Wore my rose-colored cardigan. Tied my locket tight. And when I got to Hallie's studio, a cozy little converted garage with thick soundproof foam and a single mic in the middle of the table, I sat down in front of that microphone like I was taking my place at a courtroom bench. Hallie didn't ask much. She just let me talk. I started with 1978. The year my husband died. The year the will went missing. The year my daughter suddenly got enough money to buy her first house. I told them about the tears that came too quickly, the signatures that didn't match, the way people believed her because she smiled pretty and called herself Daddy's girl. I talked for 2 hours. Then 2 more. Hallie didn't interrupt. She just nodded and recorded. I didn't cry once. By the end of it, I felt taller. The first episode aired on a Thursday morning. I didn't tell anyone, not at first. But by Friday, I got a call from a stranger. Is this you?" she asked, breathless. "The woman on Truth and Time?" "Yes," I said. "My mother said you were lying," the caller whispered. "But everything you said, it lines up with what my uncle told me before he passed." That was the beginning. The next episode, about the check, the forged signature, aired the following week. Then another, about the trust fund. People started talking. The whispers changed direction. "And my daughter?" She stormed into my room that Saturday morning, eyes red, holding her phone like a weapon. "What the hell are you doing?" she shouted. "You're ruining this family." I looked up from my journal. "I'm telling the truth," I said. "You don't know what you're saying anymore." "I know exactly what I'm saying," I said. "And this time, everyone else will know it too." She left shaking. Slammed the door. Cried loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Let them. Because the next episode was going to be the one about her. And this time, I wasn't holding back. There's a sound that comes after the truth is spoken. Not applause. Not anger. It's silence, the kind that hangs in the air like thunder that hasn't dropped yet. That's what I felt after the 3rd episode aired. This one was different. It wasn't about a check or an overheard lie. It was about the night my daughter cornered me in the laundry room and told me, flat out, that if I ever opened my mouth about what happened to her brother, she'd put me someplace quiet. I remember her exact words. "You want people to think you're losing it? Keep talking." That was 2 years ago. I didn't speak of it until now. But when I told that story into Hallie's microphone, describing the way my daughter's hands trembled, not with fear but fury, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just memory. It was justice finally peeling off its bandage. That episode went viral. Hallie said she hadn't seen numbers like that since her podcast started. Thousands of listens. Shares. Comments from people I didn't even know. "She's not crazy. She's courageous." My grandma went through the same thing. I believe her. But not everyone was thrilled. By Sunday morning, my house phone rang 5 times. My daughter didn't leave messages. She just called and hung up. My grandson messaged me once, not to apologize but to warn. "Take the podcast down, Grandma. You're embarrassing yourself." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Then I hit delete. Let them squirm. Because for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the one losing ground. I felt solid. That afternoon, Hallie invited me to record again. But this time, she asked if I wanted to go live. "The response is enormous," she said. "People want to hear you in real time." I hesitated. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew what that meant. Live meant no edits. No softening. No one to stop me if I finally told everything. "Let's do it," I said. We scheduled it for Wednesday evening. 7 p.m. I wore my cornflower blue cardigan, the one with the pearly buttons that my late husband always liked. My silver gray hair was curled just slightly at the ends, and I put on lipstick for the first time in months. Not for vanity. For presence. I wasn't going to be erased again. The mic stood before me like a friend I hadn't known I needed. Hallie gave me a nod. The light turned red. And I began. "I want to talk about memory," I said, "and how people will use your age to steal your truth." I spoke of the time my daughter told the family I had dementia, even when my doctor's report said otherwise. I spoke about being called confused every time I remembered something inconvenient. I even read from my journals. "This is April 12, 2001, I said, flipping a worn page. "It says, loaned $2,000 to Lisa for kitchen remodel. She promised to repay by August. Said she'd write it down. Never did." I read 4 more entries just like that. Hallie's eyes widened. The chat on the live stream exploded. I saw little hearts, thumbs up, fire emojis flashing across the screen. It was the first time in my life I felt heard by strangers. The live broadcast ended, and within an hour, we were trending. Hashtag her words matter. Hashtag truth is not forgetful. Hashtag don't erase grandma. I didn't start those hashtags. Someone out there did. A young woman in Montana wrote that her mother tried the same tactic, gaslighting her grandmother into silence so she could sell the house and pocket the cash. Another man from Florida said he played the podcast for his wife and it felt like listening to justice. But back home, things got worse. My daughter stopped coming over. Fine by me. But she started talking to people I once called friends, telling them I was manipulated by a young podcaster, that I was being taken advantage of for clout. Clout. As if the only reason I'd finally open my mouth about decades of secrets was for digital applause. Then came the church letter. Folded. Signed. Embossed. They said they were concerned. That some of my recent behavior suggested I needed guidance and support. That if I continued spreading unconfirmed accusations, they'd have to re-evaluate my involvement with the community. I read it twice. Then I put it in the same wooden trunk that held my journals. Because now I was collecting evidence not just of what had happened, but what was happening. They were trying to silence me again. But this time, they were too late. Because something bigger was happening, beyond family, beyond community. A journalist from a mid-sized online media outlet reached out. Said they'd been following my story and wanted to publish an article titled, "The Grandmother They Tried to Gaslight, One Voice Against Generational Lies." I almost said no. But then I remembered something my son once whispered during a rare moment of honesty, back when he was still in college. "You're the only one who remembers how it really went down, Mom. Don't let them twist it." So I said yes. They interviewed me at the library. I brought 3 journals, a folder of old receipts, and one photograph, the one with my daughter, age 12, holding a birthday cake I made from scratch. On the back I'd written, "Lisa lied and said she made this herself." Even then, I was writing it all down. The article ran 2 days later. It didn't just tell my story. It printed the names. It cited the podcast. It quoted from the journals. It linked to the broadcast. And it went viral. People started mailing letters to Hallie's studio, not hate mail, but thank you letters. Telling me that I reminded them of their own mothers, grandmothers, aunts, voices that had been dismissed for too long. One woman sent me a knitted scarf with a note, "For the loudest quiet voice I've ever heard." But my daughter? She did what manipulators do best, tried to twist the narrative. She wrote a Facebook post claiming I was sick, that she was praying for my healing, and that she hoped I'd get the help I needed. And still, the comments poured in, not in her favor. "You're scared of her truth," one wrote. "This is why old women stay quiet. And it's why they shouldn't. She's rewriting her power, not her past." I printed every comment, every article, every hashtag. Because next time I go on the mic, I'm going to read them out loud. Not for sympathy, but to remind the world, they tried to bury me in silence, and I turned it into sound. They thought I'd get tired. They thought I'd run out of stories or breath or memory, that the truth would shrivel once the spotlight dimmed. But instead, it caught fire. By the end of that week, the article had been syndicated in 3 other publications. A well-known podcast host reached out to Hallie asking if I'd be a guest for a segment on elders rewriting history. A literary agent even sent an email suggesting a book, a memoir. I almost laughed when I read it. A book? At 75? Then again, maybe that's exactly why I should. But not everyone was applauding. The mail started changing. Mixed in with the kind notes were a few bitter ones. One envelope arrived with nothing but torn-up photographs. Another had no return address and said, in shaky block letters, "Stop embarrassing your family." Embarrassing? Let me tell you what's embarrassing: living half your life in a house full of people who smile at you in public and silence you in private. What's humiliating is pretending not to notice when your daughter intercepts your birthday cards, when your own flesh and blood calls your memories imagined. I spent years embarrassed. Now they can feel it. Because for the first time, I'm not the one hiding. I went live again on a Wednesday evening. This time, I told the story of my wedding day. Not the part with the dress or the cake, the part where my husband's sister whispered in my ear, "You're marrying into a family that likes secrets." I didn't understand what she meant back then. But now I do. Secrets are currency in this family. The more you know, the more dangerous you are. So I told another one. The night my daughter lost the family Bible after a fight over inheritance. She said it was misplaced during the move. But I saw the flames in the backyard the next morning, still hissing in the fire pit. Inside that Bible? Pages. Notes. My mother's writing. Family records. Gone. Burned. Just like the letters she later destroyed, letters I wrote to my sister, my late husband, even to myself. She called them drivel. So now, I read them out loud. Live. Word for word. One listener commented, "This is the real family history. No edits. No lies." The next day, the local news called. Not just a paper, the actual evening broadcast. They wanted to do a feature. Something about forgotten voices, elder truth-tellers, and how social media was amplifying generational silence. Hallie and I agreed. We filmed the segment in her small studio. The anchor, a young woman in her 30s, asked me, "Do you ever worry about your family seeing this?" I looked straight into the camera. They already saw everything. They just didn't want anyone else to. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because I felt more alive than I had in years. Then the backlash arrived, and it didn't come in whispers this time. It came in a letter from my grandson's lawyer. A formal request to cease and desist any public communication containing potentially defamatory material about his mother. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Because the truth isn't defamatory, unless you've been living a lie. I didn't respond. But Hallie did. She posted the letter online with the caption, "So now we threaten grandmas for telling the truth?" The internet erupted. Hashtag let her speak. Hashtag elders of truth. Hashtag truth is not defamation. A flood of support poured in. Other elders began commenting, sending their stories. One 82-year-old woman from Ohio posted a video of herself reading from her late husband's war letters, which her kids once told her to let go of. Let go? Let go of the truth? Let go of the years? Let go of the witnessing? Absolutely not. It was a movement now. And it terrified my family. They started deleting posts. My daughter took down the prayers for healing message. My grandson shut down his comments. And someone, I still don't know who, sent an anonymous tip to the podcast platform, accusing us of violating privacy laws. They wanted to shut us down. But we hadn't shared a single medical record. No bank statements. No addresses. Just stories. My stories. My words. My past. And now the public was watching. You want to silence a story? Try doing it in front of 500,000 followers. Because that's where we were now. 500,000. A journalist from a national magazine called me the accidental archivist of generational truth. Another dubbed me America's grandma. I don't want either title. What I want, what I've always wanted, is something simple. To be believed. Not coddled. Not ignored. Believed. Hallie asked if I'd consider recording a full series, 6 to 8 episodes dedicated just to my journals. She wanted to call it, The Letters They Burned. I said yes. And I knew exactly which entry I'd start with. March 8, 1994. The day my daughter slapped me for showing up uninvited to her bridal shower, a shower I wasn't even told about. I wrote, "Felt the sting more in my heart than on my cheek. Wonder if I'll ever stop pretending this is normal." I read that journal aloud in the pilot episode. And it broke the internet. People called it heartbreaking, brutal, undeniably raw. But my favorite comment came from someone anonymous who simply wrote, "They underestimated the power of a grandma with receipts." Yes. Yes, they did. The second episode aired a week later. We talked about the phone bills I paid under my name. The rent checks that mysteriously stopped getting deposited. The bank account my daughter opened with my social security number. The denial. The gaslighting. The rewriting. But most of all, we talked about how silence is generational, passed down like silverware or recipes. And how breaking that silence is seen as betrayal. But I wasn't betraying them. I was finally choosing me. And that's when the final piece of retaliation dropped. My daughter filed a motion to gain power of attorney. She claimed I was mentally vulnerable and financially reckless. That I was being exploited for views and at risk. The paperwork arrived at Hallie's studio, not even my house. When Hallie read it, her hands trembled. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I looked at the papers, cold, official, legal. And I smiled. Let them try. Because I wasn't just telling stories anymore. I was building a case. It's funny, isn't it? For years they said I was too quiet, too passive, too nice. Then I raised my voice, and suddenly, I was unstable. The irony of it all didn't escape me. Not when I sat in Hallie's studio, holding the envelope that accused me of being a danger to myself. Not when I read the words "mentally compromised," printed in bold. My own daughter wanted to take away my right to make decisions, to sign documents, to tell my story. But they made one mistake. They did it after I became a public figure. Because the day that court motion went live, our podcast hit number 3 on the Apple charts. By the time the segment aired on national morning television, we were being called a movement of memory. I wasn't just a voice anymore. I was a headline. Hallie was furious when she saw the documents. They're trying to silence you with the same system they ignored you through. She was right. But I wasn't surprised. That's how people like them operate. When private shame doesn't work, they bring in the courts. They use lawyers like bandages over the wounds they caused, trying to make everything neat, legal and cold. But truth isn't cold. It's burning. And I had kept every spark. Every letter, every receipt, every voicemail I had tucked away in the back of my drawer was now evidence. Not just of memory, but of intent. My daughter had once stolen money from a shared bank account under my name. I had the withdrawal slips. She tossed away birthday cards from my late husband. I still had the photo of them, in the trash can next to an empty wine bottle. I wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. I was a historian of their cruelty. We prepared a response. Hallie helped me connect with a pro bono legal team, young, passionate attorneys who had followed my story online. They believed in elder rights. And they were hungry. We filed a counter motion. I wasn't the one who needed guardianship. I was the one who needed justice. And I was finally in a position to demand it. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. I spent those weeks speaking, on the podcast, in interviews, at events. I wasn't just telling my truth now. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been told their version of the past was too emotional, too dramatic, or too old to matter. I wore the same green knit cardigan to every event. The one my husband gave me before he passed. A little frayed at the wrists, but warm. Like his memory. At one point, a reporter asked me why I kept wearing it. I said, because it's real. It has history. And that's the point, isn't it? They nodded. Quiet. Respectful. For once, the world was listening. Then the message came. An email from my grandson. Short. Panicked. They're saying you're going to sue Mom. Please don't. It'll destroy us. Destroy them? No. This wasn't destruction. This was accountability. But I didn't reply. I didn't have to. Because everything I needed to say was already said. Out loud. On air. With proof. The day of the hearing, I walked into that courtroom not as someone frail or broken, but as someone documented. My granddaughter Hallie walked beside me, holding my hand. My daughter sat on the other side. She looked smaller than I remembered. Dressed in beige, as if hoping to disappear into the courtroom walls. She didn't speak to me. Not even once. The judge reviewed the paperwork. He looked over my medical evaluations, all clean. The witness statements, dozens of them. The recordings. The podcast excerpts. Then he asked me gently, "Do you feel capable of managing your affairs?" I looked at him. Calm. Even. I've managed my entire life. I only stopped when my family started rewriting it for me. The room went still. He nodded. Then ruled in my favor. Just like that. It wasn't loud. There was no cheering. Just the sound of truth settling into place. We stepped outside. Cameras flashing. I saw Hallie smiling through tears. And for the first time in years, I felt untouchable. Not in a boastful way. but in the way survivors feel when they realize the fire didn't kill them, it just revealed who stood by with the matches. We aired a special podcast episode that night. It was called The Courtroom, The Cardigan, and The Consequences. In it, I talked about what it felt like to sit across from someone you gave birth to, and realize they've spent more energy burying your story than honoring it. I talked about the feeling of being erased in your own home. About having your history told back to you with edits. And I read the last entry in a letter I never sent. Asterisk to my daughter. I gave you my name. You tried to take my story. But names are not legacies. Truth is. Asterisk. The world heard it. And this time, the only thing they burned was their own credibility. I didn't think I'd ever sit behind a microphone in a television studio. But there I was. Powder on my cheeks. Light pointed at my face. A tiny microphone clipped to the front of my soft green cardigan, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and old letters. You'll be live in 5, the producer called. 5 seconds to silence decades of being talked over. 5 seconds to make sure the world knew I wasn't senile, bitter, or confused. I was clear, sharp, and finished being erased. The talk show was called Morning Seat at the Table. They'd invited me on after the podcast hit 2 million downloads and the court ruling made local headlines. Suddenly, I wasn't just someone with a story, I was someone with a platform. A living reminder that memory isn't something you outgrow, it's something you defend. The host greeted me kindly. It's not often we hear from voices your age telling stories like this, she said. I smiled. That's because people my age are usually too polite to set the record straight. The audience laughed. But it wasn't mockery. It was the sound of people realizing they'd underestimated someone who knew better. We talked about the letters. How my family burned the box after claiming I was hoarding clutter. How I found ashes under the backyard tree, where they thought I wouldn't notice. How they didn't expect me to have copies, scanned and backed up by my late husband long ago. Then she asked, why go public? I looked at the camera. And I answered not as a victim, but as someone who had had enough. Because they rewrote my story like I wasn't alive to read it. That line went viral before I even left the building. Clips hit social media within minutes. Comments poured in hundreds, then thousands. From older women, yes. But also from teenagers. Single moms. War veterans. People from all walks of life who had been told their truth was too inconvenient to count. And in that moment, I understood something I never expected. This wasn't just about my past anymore. It was about all of us. Every person whose story got shoved in a drawer. Every person whose pain got rewritten by the people who caused it. Hallie and I decided it was time for the final act. Not just a podcast. Not just a talk show. A book. We called it, The Letters They Tried to Burn. And it was a collection of every piece of writing my family destroyed, ignored, or tried to silence, along with new entries, fresh reflections, and commentary from me, raw and unedited. We pitched it to publishers. 2 rejected it. 1 offered a small deal. Then a 4th one, a major house, read the manuscript and said, we don't just want this. We need this. Within a month, the book was announced. Pre-orders climbed. The news coverage exploded. And then, the apology came. A single email from my daughter. You've made your point. You didn't have to ruin everything. I sat staring at it for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because even now, she thought the worst thing I did was tell the truth. I didn't reply. I posted a new podcast episode instead. In it, I said, they say I've ruined the family. But a family that only survives by silencing its elders was never whole to begin with. That quote was printed in The Atlantic. I was interviewed for NPR the following week. And then one chilly Sunday morning the local paper, the very one that once rejected my wedding announcement, the one that printed every obituary but skipped my husband's, called me. We'd like to do a cover story, the editor said. Front page. I paused. Thought about that tree in the backyard. The ashes. The silence. And then I said, only if I write it myself. He agreed. And just like that, the same town that ignored my truth for 40 years was about to publish every word I'd ever been told to forget. I titled the article, A Memory They Couldn't Burn. The morning it printed, I stood at the corner cafe, a paper in my hand, coffee in the other. I watched as people picked up the issue. Read it. Pointed. Nodded. Cried. Some avoided me. Others came up to say thank you. But none of them, not one, looked away like they used to. The past wasn't just mine anymore. It was public. Permanent. Bound in ink. And no one, not a daughter, not a son-in-law, not a courtroom, could erase it again. I wasn't bitter. I was free. And now, my story would live longer than their denial ever could. Sometimes, people ask me if I'm angry. If it hurts, seeing my own daughter's face when she passes me at the market and pretends I'm just another stranger in the bread aisle. If it stings, knowing my grandson unfollowed me on every platform, then blocked my number. If it aches to have my name whispered like a curse word at dinner tables that once welcomed me with hugs. Yes. Yes, it does. But not in the way they think. Not because I miss their approval. But because it's proof that some people only loved the version of me they could control. And when I refused to stay small, they vanished. That's not loss. That's clarity. The truth is, I didn't just get justice, I got my voice back. I got mornings where I wake up and don't feel invisible. I got afternoons with Hallie where we read letters from listeners around the world. Daughters, grandfathers, strangers who say, because of you, I finally spoke up too. I got nights where I sit with my cup of tea, staring at a shelf lined with copies of my own book, printed in 10 languages now, and know that the words they burned live on tenfold. That's not revenge. That's legacy. But I didn't stop there. Because I knew if they tried to rewrite my past, they'd do it to others too. So Hallie and I launched something new, the Legacy Table. It's a non-profit media foundation, built to help older voices share their stories before someone else writes them out of existence. We host workshops for memoir writing. We train volunteers to record oral histories in senior centers. We give out grants to young documentarians who want to amplify forgotten lives. And every month, we host a roundtable podcast called The Unburnables. Our tagline? You can't silence the past, not when it's still speaking. The first guest we had was a 93-year-old former seamstress from Detroit. She told us about designing dresses during the civil rights marches and hiding activist leaflets inside coat linings. Her granddaughter cried the entire interview. Said it was the first time she'd heard her grandma talk about anything before 1980. That's what this is about. Not just justice. Restoration. Memory. Making sure the stories they tried to bury grow roots deeper than any lie. The day our nonprofit got national recognition, a short segment on PBS, I sat in my backyard under that same tree they thought would hide the ashes. I was alone. Just me, the breeze, and the hush of a soft green cardigan around my shoulders. The tree had grown stronger. Its branches wider. And right where the box of my letters had once been burned into dirt, a patch of wildflowers bloomed, bright and defiant. I'd never planted them. Nature did that on her own. Funny how life replaces what people destroy, if you give it time. A few days later, I received a thick white envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a handwritten note. You were right. I was scared. And I didn't know how to live in a world where your voice was louder than mine. I hope someday, you'll forgive me. Your daughter. I stared at it. There were no excuses. Just raw truth. I didn't call her. Didn't write back. But I did something better. I read the letter, anonymously, on the next podcast episode. Then I said, forgiveness isn't silence. It's remembering fully, and choosing peace anyway. That episode had the highest stream count we've ever seen. And not because it was sensational, but because it was real. Just like my story. Just like every word they tried to burn. In the end, I didn't need their approval. Or their apology. I had something bigger. I had the truth, and 1,000 voices echoing back, me too. So if you're listening now, wondering whether it's too late to speak up, let me say this as clearly as I can. Your past is still yours. No one can erase it. Not with fire. Not with silence. Not with shame. Write it down. Say it out loud. Frame it. Print it. Broadcast it. And if they still don't believe you, let them choke on the headline.